good afternoon. Welcome to this special Biz News broadcast, where we will be giving you insight into something called 12B. Now, those of you long-time tribe members of the Biz News community will remember we had something called 12J a couple of years ago. It closed in June 2021, and one of our partners in 12J was Jaltech, who's Jonty Sachs, is in the webinar today. Jonty, I hope you can repeat for our community the investment returns that you guys managed for them in 12J, because they've been really quite spectacular. And then also with us in the webinar today is Patrick Bennett. Now, Patrick is with a company called Magneto Renewable Energy. And guys, just to set a little bit of the stage before we go into this, it's all to do with government, the South African government, trying to incentivize us as citizens to invest in solar energy, or at least some renewable form of energy, so that we can overcome the disaster called Eskom. So there are lots of people on the webinar today. Before we go any further, our General Manager, Stuart Lohman, you see how important this webinar is to us, Jonty. We get our GM to actually come in and help us. He is looking after the tech, make sure that everything works well. Stu, do you want to just make sure that everyone can hear us?
Thanks, Alec. I think Jonty just gave you first-hand experience of load shedding there while you were talking.
A while for the generator to kick in, but yeah, that's the world we're living in.
No, all good. Just those new to the webinar, there's a control panel on your right-hand side of your screen. There should be a little high-five button on there. If you can hear my voice and see Alec, Patrick, and Jonty on screen, can you please give us a high-five, just so that we know that we're coming through loud and clear? So I've got one or two, hopefully a few more just to confirm. There we go, Alec, all good. And then there's on that same control panel, there's a little question mark. If you can please drop your questions in there, and Alec will take them to the panelists as you go through. But all good on the tech side, Alec.
Super, thanks, Stu. Jonty, let's just pick up with where we spoke 2 years or more than 2 years ago, when we had this amazing thing called 12J that people could invest in and then write it back against their taxable income. And in fact, it worked out brilliantly, because the investments that were made gave a return on top of being able to write your investment against tax. So it's quite complex, and we did go through it in some detail. Is 12B something similar?
It's very similar in the sense that there's a tax benefit, which is higher than the 12J days. But what's nice about Section 12B is that in the Section 12J days, there were lots of limitations. You know, I couldn't invest along potentially with my wife in the investment. The investor, the actual 12Js had a limit in terms of how much you could invest. There was a requirement on how much the 12Js had to invest. There were lots of restrictions around the fund manager. With 12B, it's different. It's only solar. The benefit to the investor is they get 125% tax deductibility of the investment. So if they invest R1 million, they can reduce their taxable income by 1.25. So there's an enhancement. And this enhancement was actually news to the market. In February, the finance minister announced a few tax incentives. One, which is often confused with this, is if you're a residential homeowner, you want to install solar on your home, you can claim up to 15,000 Rand back. In the Section 12B space, they increased the allowance. And that increase has made it really exciting for investors. But really what the government's saying is, private market, please help fund energy in South Africa. We need your help. And as a result, Section 12B became more popular, more attractive to investors. But ultimately, the similarities with Section 12J is that they're both tax deductible. But Section 12B is more exciting from a tax perspective.
And Patrick, this is your game, solar energy. Just how did you get into it?
Haven't been a solar specialist for a very long time, Alex. I've been an importer for many years. Our core business initially is a company called TEVO, T-E-V-O, and we're one of the top suppliers of non-food merchandise into retail. So that's a poor explanation for our solar credentials. But we've spent a lot of time eating a lot of noodles on the eastern side of the world in China, and yeah, so we understand the role of importing, of sourcing good product, and working with good factories. And if you fast forward to today, all solar components, the bulk of solar components that are coming into this country originate in China. Certainly all the panels, the biggest panel factories are in China. Inverters and certainly the large portion of batteries all come from China. And so about 4 years ago, we couldn't bear it any longer. Solar was not core to what we do as a business. But we just saw an industry where people were constantly saying we're short of stock, we can't get product into the country. The big phrase you always heard is the stock's on the water. And we bring in 400 different items, which we supply to 2,000 retail stores every week. And we are always on time with stock. We're 99% in stock. And we figured we could solve this solar component problem by being in stock at the right time when the stock was needed. And so we made the investment a number of years ago to get in engineers. We understand sourcing and importing and warehousing and the movement and the distribution of product. But we had to bring in experts who understood the solar components. And we hired engineers. And fast forward to today, we work with the world's top panel manufacturer, and we bring product in exclusively for them. Stock on the ground in South Africa. We supply anything from small installations to powering a gold mine, and we've concluded contracts on that scale. And in a similar way, we import inverters and batteries. And then it goes beyond that, is all the wiring, the switch gear, the fuse gear, the junction boxes. Installers hate to find product from different places. Their key role is to try and get as much as they can from one source, and installation is their skill, not sourcing. And so we've set up a business. Magneto is a well-known brand. We've sold 8 or 9 million Magneto lanterns into South Africa, which are these LED lanterns. So it's a well-known brand, and we've formed a business called Magneto Renewables, which has been going for a number of years now. And our core skill is really supplying product for residential, and then different product into the corporate and industrial and utility space. So we really, the product is our game, and the ability to have the right product on the ground for installations.
And Jonty, how did you and Patrick get together?
You know, our core focus at the moment is obviously solar and investing in the solar market. So we, being fund managers, we're not experts in the solar space. We don't understand technology. We don't understand the growing market in terms of what is referred to as EPCs, or companies that install solar. So for us, building relationships with the importers is critical for a few reasons. One is we know whether there's stock in the country, which has been a problem. And two, we need the likes of Patrick's business to really put us in contact and in connection with the big players in the market from an installer's perspective, and the big projects. So the likes of, you know, gold mines, blue chip businesses, we really want to be engaging with these companies because ultimately we want to provide them with funding. So hence our relationship with Patrick and his business has evolved.
I remember sitting in the lockup in Parliament in February when Enoch Godongwana, the finance minister, announced this incentive to invest in solar. And he took the 12B as it then was. It was 100% right back, but you could only claim 50% year one, 30% year two, 20% year three. And that was revolutionized into 125% in year one. Patrick, have you got numbers that you can share with us on how that might have impacted the demand for solar panels? Because I guess that would be the source or the best reflection of how successful the government's initiative has been this far.
I think the government initiative and the 125% tax write back is a driver. And yes, so that's a positive, and yes, it's driving demand. But Alec, right now, just seeing Jonty go into the dark and a few seconds later the generator fired up. That experience is driving demand more than anything else. And the light in his room and the power on his laptop is not the primary thing. Imagine running a production business or any form of business where you are dependent on systems, you're dependent on lighting, and people are realizing that the problem is just not going to be solved by government and Eskom. And solar, once you've installed it, most people install solar for the reason of load shedding, to run their businesses and to keep their homes functioning. But and everybody kind of commences the journey because they've had enough of load shedding and they have to come up with a plan. Our experience beyond that, if you interview clients who've installed solar, is it goes way beyond just being a solution for load shedding, because in many respects it pays for itself. And so if you had to have a number of people on screen who have installed solar into their lives, yes, it solves the load shedding dilemma, but in many respects, depending on the system that you put in, it saves you a heck of a lot of money as well. And if it's well engineered and the right system has been installed for your needs, it literally pays for itself. And so it goes from being a disgruntled customer who's looking for a solution for load shedding to someone who says, Trish, not only have I taken the load shedding out of the equation, I'm actually saving money. We installed it in our own businesses, in warehouses and distribution centers. We have one production facility which has never bought a watt of electricity from the moment we took it over. It's got panels on the roof, inverters installed, it's got sufficient storage to see it through load shedding. It functions predominantly during the day when the sun is shining, and we've never bought a watt of electricity, and that has paid for itself from the word go. So yes, I think the tax incentive is a driver. I think a bigger driver is people are looking for a solution so that they can carry on with their lives, run their businesses, and then a byproduct or a benefit thereafter is they actually realize, look, this actually can meet my electricity requirements or a large portion of it.
The Madornit factor. In fact, when we came back from the UK in 2019, I promised my wife the first thing we would do is that we would put in, as soon as we owned a home, we would put in something that made us immune to Eskom's load shedding. And that was in our Johannesburg home. And I miss it. Boy, do I miss it. I miss my solar panels in Joburg, because having moved to the coast and into a rented accommodation, there isn't solar. And it's only once you get back into good old load shedding that you realize how disruptive this is in a home sense, and of course for people who work from home. But Patrick, before we go into the benefits and how people can invest in this and get the 125 without necessarily putting in or having to put in just their own solar panels, how big a installation is required for the tax benefit for a company? There are lots of people who work from home, and surely they can justify that as a business expense or not. Help us through that part of the equation before we go into kind of the number crunching.
Yeah, so Jonty, you might need to help us here in terms of whether the installation needs to be a fixed installation. Does the fixed installation relate to the solar panels only, or does it relate to the inverter and the batteries as well? Just clarify that.
Yeah, so companies, and if you're a sole proprietor working from home, you're a doctor working from your practice, you can, as a company or as an individual, buy solar equipment, install it. So the equipment includes inverter, batteries, and panels, and you can then write that off at 125% of the investment value in the hands of a company. So yeah, I guess it all depends on the size of the equipment that you're going to need for the particular business.
Yeah.
Have people been doing that, Patrick? Have sole proprietors been doing that, sticking in panels at home as part of the business expense?
Yes, they have. So I want to detail that there are a few solutions, because you're picturing panels on roof, and you need panels on roof. You need an inverter system, which takes DC generated by the panels and turns it into alternating current, which you use to power your devices. And then you need batteries for storage. In the simple, and these don't need to be bolted to the wall. So Panels can be installed on the roof, and you can have a mobile system. Many people don't own their homes, and they don't own the office that they work in. So you have panels which need to be installed on the roof that generates electricity. But we have a lot of mobile solutions as well, where you can have an electrician come into a home or a small office, and with a simple cheap work, maybe 1,000, 1,500 Rand, out of your DB board, they can put in an essential circuit with a plug-in where you can then put a mobile power station, a portable power station as we call it. And in the simplest form, you've got power being generated by the sun, charging batteries in the power station, and the power station has an inverter connected to it, and you can plug in your devices, your lighting, or aspects of your home directly into the DB board, and you could be working in that facility for a few months or for however long, and the whole product could be transported because it's all in one carry-along pack. So that is a simple solution. We are getting requests from certain municipalities around the country. How do we power a shack? And in a shack, the first question is, how much power does a shack require? We need to power a TV, maybe a set-top box, and charge cell phones. There's a portable power solution for that. And as you have your power needs, you can have a small power solution, which can go from 200 watts to 600 to 1,200, 2,200 up to 3.6 kilowatt, which will power a fairly substantial home and offices for your essential needs, and all the power is provided from panels. Then you go into fixed installations where you are literally bolting in an inverter, putting in permanent batteries, whether it's rented or owned property, and you are putting in a solution. Always, the solution is put together according to the needs to run the various parts of the home or the office. And so the starting point always is, how much power do you need? What do you need to run? And from there, that dictates the sort of solution that you're looking for. And they go from fairly simplistic, more portable solutions through to installed solutions for a corporate or industrial installation.
So the private sector has come to the party. You can start, as you say, even from an informal dwelling all the way up to a gold mine. But what's the demand been like? And I think that's, okay, it's not just Enoch making it more appealing, although from Jonty's point of view and from the financial point of view, the 12B is an investment opportunity. But from the imports that you've been sourcing, or the panels you've been sourcing, what's happened in the last couple of years in the amount of panels that have come into South Africa?
Dramatic. They don't talk in terms of panels are measured in megawatts. You and I are expecting an answer of how many panels have been sold. Probably the most common panel put on a roof today is a 550 watt panel, and panel suppliers talk in megawatts. So a megawatt is 1,000,000 watts of power. So if one panel generates 500, 550 watts, I know in the first 2 months of this year, Longji, who is the biggest panel manufacturer in the world and our partner in this territory, their information is that 700 megawatts of panels came into the country in the first 2 months of this year. So 700 megawatts is 700 million watts. Divide that by 500 odd per panel, and you'll get an answer of how many panels came into the country. It's a big number. And when I talk to the big panel factories, I mean, South Africa is a relatively small country. We're not the wealthiest country on the planet, but in Africa, all of them will confirm that the biggest market for panels on the continent today is South Africa. And it's a market which has got the attention of all the panel and panel inverter battery suppliers. There was a solar show in Johannesburg recently at the convention center in Sandton, and all the big players were there, and it was chaos. So the demand at the moment is huge. We are bringing in many megawatts of panels each month, and the stock is pretty much sold before it arrives. That's the demand.
And just for context, an Eskom power station, if I recall, they had these things called 6-packs. And the 6-packs were what, 600 megawatts for each of those 6 units. And then you're talking about billions and billions of rands that were spent on these power stations, quite apart from the corruption and the cost overruns. But if you had a big power station with a 6-pack in it, 3,600 megawatts, what you're saying to us now is that the private sector demand will be like building a new power station every 18 months.
It could be. I think the example that's been thrown around, and that's even mentioned in government circles, when the new electricity minister talks about the power of solar, the example always mentioned is Vietnam. A great tragedy is that I have panels on the roof of my home and on our office. We generate more electricity during the day than we can use in that home or office. But the process is not in place to allow me to export that onto the grid. I live in La Lucia in Durban. It's absolutely wasted, and I get nothing for putting it onto the grid. So now look at the Vietnam scenario. In 1 year, just by putting together all the mechanics needed to export power onto the grid, I think the Vietnam example is 11,000 megawatts were put onto the grid in 1 year, just by enabling the export of excess power onto the grid. Just a tragic story that I think solar is going to grow at an amazing rate, but I think we can solve a lot of our problems. 11,000 megawatts today would solve 11 stages of load shedding. And Vietnam achieved that in 1 year. And so to just put the wheels in process to be able to harness the solar electricity that we're generating on our roofs, which the country can use, would be step number 1.
Well, we do know that we tend to get there eventually in South Africa. So let's hope that this is another example. Getting back to the issue at hand, though, and Jonty, maybe you can just start taking us through what 12B, how 12B works, because now you certainly whet my appetite from 2 areas. One, as an investor, what I can get back from investing in this 12B in the same way as 12J was a fantastic opportunity. But secondly, there must be businesses who are thinking maybe we can borrow money from this scheme, because surely the people who invest, on the one hand, that money has to go into something, and you have to find companies who want to make these installations. So I know you've given me 3 graphs. Thank you for not overburdening us. But perhaps you could start with the first one, and I'll bring it up on screen, and we can then you can then talk us through this.
Yeah. So Alec, this is really just illustrating to potential investors the tax benefit here. So if you have a look at the middle column, you have an investor or an individual earns 5 million rand a year, decides not to invest into 12B. Their taxable income will stay 5 million, and they'll pay roughly 2 million rand to SARS. The same individual in the far right column decides, okay, I want to invest 1 million rand. They invest 1 million, but they can deduct, or they can reduce their taxable income, in this case of 5 million, by 1.250, because the deductibility is 125%. So they incentivized or encouraged to invest because they get an additional tax benefit. This is different to 12J. 12J, if you invested 1 million, you could only reduce the 5 million by 1 million, but now you can reduce it by more. So this brings this investor's taxable income to 3.75, reducing the tax burden. But what's exciting about the investment is, as a taxpayer, if you invest 1 million, if you're in the highest bracket, you get 562,000 rand back from SARS. So if I'm a PAYE payer, every month I'm paying tax, I then receive my salary. By investing, I'll get 562,000 rand back. If I look at our Section 12J investors, we don't have a single investor who's not getting their tax benefit from 12J. So our investors should get their 12B. But putting your investor hat on, what really is happening here is you're investing 1 million and you're getting 56% back of your investment effectively in the first year, which is from an investor's perspective, de-risking you enormously upfront. So that's really what the slide is doing. It's explaining the tax benefit.
What do you get back in addition to that? Because clearly, if you're putting in R1 million, you don't just want to get 56% back. Thank you very much for year one, but what comes thereafter?
So, you know, how this investment works is investors invest into a partnership. In the 12J days, you'd invest into a company and become a shareholder. But to enjoy the 12B benefit, you need to invest into a partnership. This partnership pools the capital and then looks to acquire solar assets to install onto commercial properties. Now, when we install onto commercial properties, the partnership ends up selling electricity to the end customer, and that's the opportunity here. Is we'll take capital, we'll take assets with the likes of Patrick and his network of large installers or huge end customers. We'll provide them with a solar solution, and we sell them electricity. From an investor's perspective, and to answer your question, the investors will enjoy returns from the sale of the electricity. So our model is really simple. We charge the end customer a rate which is linked to prime. So we're negotiating rates of around prime +2, and we then enjoy cash flows of around prime +2 with an additional capital portion. So our anticipation, and we've already got term sheets signed, is we're looking, if an investor invests R1 million in the first year, to return around 13%. That 13% escalates every year because there's an escalation provision. But ultimately, if you're investing R1 million pre-tax, we're looking to return with a tax benefit to the investors of around R2.5 million, which is really a significant amount. But what makes the investment interesting is the risk. You know, so here the risk is reduced because you've got an underlying physical asset. If the end customer doesn't pay for the power, well, we can collect the asset. They're being de-risked because they're getting a huge portion back through SARS and potentially another amount, which I'll discuss in a moment. We know who the end customer is. We do in-depth due diligences on these companies. We know who they are. We know how much electricity they're paying. We know whether they've been paying electricity. And the investors are getting cash flows every year, so they're being de-risked. So here, you know, we're looking at really predictable income from these businesses. If you take all the risk mitigants, which I just mentioned, this really reduces the risk profile of the investment. And if you pop over to the next slide, Alec, is where this investment becomes really attractive, even more attractive, should I say. And what I'll explain in the numbers in a moment is our intention in the first year is to raise the capital, to invest the capital, and we have to. If we don't invest all the money by the end of February, our investors will only get a portion of the tax benefit. So if we only invest 50 million, they'll only get half of the tax benefit because we are capping our fund at 100 million. So we have to invest the money. Although we capped it at 100 million, we already have investments that we are busy due diligencing of in excess of 170 million. So we're really confident that in a short period of time, we'll be able to invest the money and hopefully raise more money before the end of the year. But if you look at this slide, what we're going to be doing in the second year is we're going to be looking at raising debt in the fund at a maximum of 34%. So not a huge portion of debt in relation to the equity that we raise. We'll have, for every 2 Rand of equity, 1 Rand of debt. And why this is interesting to investors is because with the debt that we raise, we'll buy more solar assets. And what the legislation says is the more assets you own, the more of a tax benefit you receive. So in the second year, we'll have another opportunity for investors that wouldn't have to put in any more money to get another tax benefit. So if I walk you through the numbers, the investor in the far right column invests $1 million, gets a refund if they're in the highest bracket of 562,000. In the year of investment, we'll generate income for the investors of 135. That's what we're forecasting. The second year, we're going to raise debt, buy more assets, allow the investor to get another tax benefit, and there'll obviously be cash flows in the second year. Now, if you add all these amounts together, you minus income tax, which they'll be paying on the cash flows, this amounts to R1 million. So the investors are going to be getting their money back by the end of year 2. But this is a 10-year investment, because we need to be able to supply or enter into 10-year purchasing power agreements with these end customers. If we don't enter into 10-year terms, we are not competitive with the likes of the banks and other players in the market. So this is a 10-year investment. But effectively, what this slide is demonstrating is that by year 2, you're getting your money back. So you are really de-risked. Not that this investment doesn't have risk, it does have risk, but it makes it really attractive from a cash flow perspective for investors. You're getting your money back, and then for the next 8 years, you're effectively just enjoying the upside from the investment.
Well, it depends on your taxable income, no doubt. If you've got 5 million rands worth of taxable income, it's a no-brainer. Where does it start becoming a question? Where do you, how far down in the taxable income area do you have to go before, you know, I mean, someone earning 20,000 rand a month is probably not going to make sense. So what's that number?
The number is, you don't want, so my personal circumstance, I'm investing a sum of money which will reduce my taxable income to just above 370,000 rand. Because above 370,000 rand, I'm enjoying 35% plus as a refund. You know, so if you, because of the additional 25%, at a 45 bracket, you're getting 56. At a 41 bracket, you're getting around 50. And so forth, it goes further down. So for me, in my personal capacity, I'm looking at a sum of money which will bring me down to around 370,000 rand.
That's 31,000 a month. Is that correct? 370 per annum or 3?
So I'll give you an example of the 5 million. So if I earn 5 million rand, I'm going to invest a sum of money, and forgive my maths, I'm the lawyer in the team. I'm going to invest a sum of money of around 3.5 million rand, because the 3.5 million rand at 125% will allow me to claim a deduction, and I'm going to just estimate, of around 470,000 rand. So 5 million less 470,000 rand will bring me into the 300,000 rand tax bracket. The reason I would do that is because that the refund that we're receiving from SARS will be more than 35% based on the amount that I invest, if that makes sense.
So if I understand correctly, you want to bring down your taxable income to 370,000 rand. So whatever your taxable income is, if say you're earning 100,000 rand a month and it's 1.2 million, you want to you would then take what, 900,000 rand roughly to bring it down to 370,000, or sorry, 830,000 rand. That's what your investment. I get it. Okay, I think that's simple enough. Patrick,
sorry, I just want to have a disclaimer. Is obviously this is all dependent on who you are. You know, so I'm young. I can take more risk. I don't have a huge liquidity requirement. You know, I don't foresee in the next couple of years. Effectively, the next 2 years, I don't, because I believe I'm going to get all my money back. So some people aren't in that position, and they shouldn't be investing such large sums of money. So, you know, I just want to make that statement.
But you'll help them out once they contact you and they give you the circumstances. You can actually guide them in that respect.
We'll give them an understanding. We wouldn't offer them, you know, tax advice. We can put them in front of people that can, but we wouldn't give them advice.
But generally, thank you. Generally speaking, you've explained it. Patrick, is there enough demand for the investments that Jonty is likely to get from the business community?
When Jonty mentioned the fund to me, I said, and he said it's 100 million is the initial amount. Said you're going to gobble that up pretty quickly. So the demand is substantial, well in excess of that. So I think if the initial fund value is 100 million, I think you're going to reach that number very quickly. Does that answer your question?
It does, but I suppose another big question on here is, when is load shedding likely to end? Because if load shedding is going to end, then what's the point in having this big investment into solar? Because presumably, if load shedding ends, and there's so much solar coming into the market that Eskom's deliverables are, okay, don't laugh, but that they can actually meet supply. or the demand. Their supply could actually meet demand in South Africa. Where do you see that date, Patrick?
Alec, there's been no let up. I think, if anything, the electricity availability factor, I think Eskom have targeted 75%. 75% is not going to happen anytime soon. And the availability factor just goes down, down, down. It's in the mid-50s at the moment. So they are so way off. I think solar is going to add to it, but I think solar and the growth in solar is going to be with us for a number of years. Yes, we're waiting for Koeberg, one of the Koeberg reactors, to come back online. We're waiting for Kusile and Medupi to be online. But we're not seeing any let up whatsoever. So I think this, even as Jonty has put a 2-year time frame on this, I think load shedding is going to be with us at least for that period of time and beyond. And I think the investment in solar going forward, I think the investment in solar is going to be with us for a long time, simply because it makes sense. By investing in solar, you are flatlining your cost of electricity going forward. Every year, NERSA meet and they decide what the increases are going to be this year. And I don't think any of us want to have an obligation to Eskom to get our electricity. And I think you've got to take charge of that. If you're running a business or if you're working from home, you've got to take charge of your situation. And the beauty of the investment in solar is you're literally flatlining your cost. If you're doing a power purchase agreement, which Jonty has spoken about, is really providing entities with power, there'll be an escalation built in. But for anyone who invests in solar and buys into the system, gets the deduction, you're literally you're taking control over the cost of electricity, and you have security of electricity going forward, and that's what everybody wants. So I haven't spoken to anyone who has cautioned us in the area of solar to be careful that Eskom are coming online. I think there's a lot of runway left for solar to be sold in this country.
Jonty, you've got one more slide about the, and many in our community, I'm sure, who had a very successful investment with you in 12J, are thinking, is there any connection between the two, between that investment? Can you swap it into this one? They're both solar, etc. Can you help us through?
Yeah, so if you wouldn't mind just jumping to the next slide. The for any Section 12J investor, if let's assume in the highest tax bracket, when you invested, you got a really nice, if you invested $1 million, you got 450,000 Rand back from SARS. But what a lot of people have forgotten is when you exit the 12J, you pay capital gains tax, but from a zero base cost. So what the middle column is trying to illustrate is if you invested $1 million, you got your $1 million back, you're paying at the highest bracket 18% to SARS, which is 180,000 Rand. Now, what we've experienced now as a fund manager, our competitors are experiencing in their business, is that investors have now reached maturity. The investment has reached maturity, and they now need to exit their 12J. So what we are saying to our investors is a solution to cushioning the 180,000 Rand in tax in this example is investing into the 12B. Now, if you have a look at the right-hand column in the middle, by investing into the 12J, into the 12B, you're receiving 562,000 Rand back. You can then offset the 560 against the 180 that you're going to be paying to SARS, and that leaves you with 380,000 Rand. So you are in a positive position. Your $1 million Rand has now grown to 1.38, almost 1.4, versus negative 18% or to 820,000 Rand. So we are seeing a lot of investors who are exiting our funds, competitors' funds, and investing with us to really cushion the punitive 180,000 Rand obligation when you exit a Section 12J fund.
Yeah, it never ceases to amaze me how we are able, by doing research and by tapping into our partners like you guys, to serve our community in a way that makes real practical sense. And we had tens of millions, hundreds of millions of rands were invested by business community members into 12J. Now there are a lot of them who are sitting there saying, whoa, what happens next? here you've given an option. So thank you very much for that, Jonty. Stu, from where I'm seeing, I don't see any questions, and I don't think that's possible given that the number of people who are on this webinar. Is it perhaps something wrong on my tech on this side?
Hi, Alec. Yes, there are quite a few questions. Do you want me to just run? I'm not sure.
For some reason, I'm not seeing them on my side. So please, would you go through?
Perfect. I'll just go by first names. I know we like to keep identity sort of obscured, but Karen says we were visiting Australia recently and were surprised to see almost every house had solar panels. The cost of setup there is much cheaper than what it will cost in SA. Why is this? We saw really good products in use such as LG systems, etc. I'm not sure if there's an answer to that, Patrick.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I agree that things are cheaper. We have an entity in Australia where we supply product into Australia. Panels are like buying potatoes. When we buy panels, you literally buy per watt, and we literally negotiate with factories, and the price change every month or every 3 months, and there's a worldwide price per watt, which fluctuates and moves, but those in Australia will literally be buying panels at the same price as we do in this country. And I fail to see how inverters and batteries would be cheaper in Australia. So I can't agree with that statement. Comparing apples with apples, the same product between South Africa and Australia, there's a higher shipping cost from China to South Africa than directly to Australia. They're closer to each other. But then I would also say that the labor cost of installation in Australia is far higher than here. So I think that's a general statement that I wouldn't agree with. I think the installation costs are cheaper here. The labor is cheaper in South Africa, slightly higher shipping cost, but there's no reason why product would be cheaper in Australia. And I would suffice to say that the markups on landed cost of product in Australia are higher than in South Africa. So happy to answer the question from the person who wrote in. If they can give me an exact example of the product, I can put numbers to it, but I wouldn't agree with that statement.
Stu, once you put your camera, your webcam on, and then I'll put mine off, and you can then pose the questions and see where they're coming from.
Thanks, Alec. I wasn't ready for public image, but it's all good. Doe just wants to, is there not an opportunity to invest in local manufacturing of panels, etc., which would surely also enhance government's appetite for more investment incentives?
Yes, there is. The government, Department of Trade and Industry and Competition, are very keen to have local manufacture of all things, knowing that it creates value in South Africa and it creates jobs. And there are 2 companies that currently assemble and do a level of manufacture in this country. The sadness is that the volumes are low, and when you compare the cost versus robotic manufacture in China, it's just not cost competitive. It's a good quality panel, but the cost is just is not feasible. And secondly, the demand exceeds the volume that they can generate. So what they are generating into this market is a drop in the ocean, and it is at a higher cost. So the rule of thumb is we can't make panels in this country at the right price and in the volume required to meet the demand. And so the landed cost of imported product with 0 duty on it is cheaper, better value.
I put my camera back on because there was a question that was posed to us, or an allegation made a while ago, that there's some kind of a BE tax that is added to solar panels. In other words, you've got to buy the solar panels from a certain grouping that has got government approval. Is that an urban myth?
I don't know of a BEE tax. What I do know and have experience with is where we supply into large-scale corporate and industrial, where the companies, in terms of protecting their own BBBEE rating, are incentivized to buy from a company with preferential procurement. And so they would say, listen, we need panels, but for our own procurement status and points, we need it from a black empowered supplier. And So much so that in our case, to be able to supply such companies, we have set up a black empowered company where the team that have been in the trenches building our TiVo business for years, we have made them the black partners. So we've taken our own previously disadvantaged staff. They are our partners in that PE company, and that company, Lubanzi, has been successful in securing contracts that require preferential procurement. And this applies to mines and heavy industry, where their black empowered points, they monitor everything in their business, and that's important. Panels are expensive. If you're building a 60 megawatt power plant, it's over 100,000 panels which are going to come in to generate that level of power. It's a big spend, and it's important that they get preferential procurement points. I don't know of a BBE tax, but there's a slight margin added for the product to be supplied by a black empowered company.
No, I think you've clarified that. The point was, if you're a small business, you don't have to buy necessarily from a approved supplier. You are welcome to buy from anyone you like, and that was really where the urban myth came in. Sorry, Stu, back to you.
Thanks, Alec. Probably one for you, John. Yolanda wants to know, how's the tax deduction applied to a business as opposed to the natural person?
Well, the business will get 27% of 125. They'll be able to multiply their tax levels, which is 27%, by 125%. So effectively, the business will get 33.7% as a tax deduction. In other words, if a business acquired a solar kit of R1 million, they'll get a tax benefit of 330,000 rand. But in 12B as an investment, obviously businesses can invest into an investment like our own, and they'll enjoy 33% as the tax benefit versus an individual who will see 56%.
Patrick, I think this one's for you. Tammy wants to know, what's the maximum size of one of those portable installations you mentioned?
Currently, they are in the range of the stock that's in the country, probably in the range of between 200 watts and 1200 watts in our case. We have products in production at the moment which will take portable power stations to 1500 watts, 2200 watts, and 3.6 kilowatt. If you shop around, there are products on the market. I've seen products available in Builders Warehouse, in Macros, in the Incredible Connection outlets, and you can get the products online. If you're prepared to shop around, you will get products in that sort of scale. Our business trying to provide value, we are bringing in products in that space, and we are driving down the price because you're currently paying quite a premium for anything over 1500 watts. You're paying quite a premium, and we're bringing in product. I would say in the next 6 weeks or so, we will land product in that space that will have a substantial saving over anything else currently available in the marketplace.
John, just a follow-up on that, Timmy wants to know, is the portable installation also tax deductible?
Is this, sorry,
those portable installations, are they also tax deductible through the scheme?
Well, I would imagine, so I would assume no. It all depends on what the portable scheme is. So if it is if there's a solar component to it, then potentially the business will be able to expense it. But even if it's not, if it's going to be used in the purpose of a business, it's an expense in any event. But to answer from a Section 12B perspective, if there's a solar component, inverter component, battery component, then yes.
Thanks, John. Charles wants to know, can companies who rent to own systems also claim 12B, and is there a limit per 12B claim?
So there's no limit. Companies, individuals can invest or acquire solar panels to any amount and get the full benefit. The rent to own, the rental payments, they're an expense, so you can expense it, but you don't get the 12B. You need to actually physically own the asset. You need to expense money to buy the asset or invest to get the 12B.
John just wants to know, is there a recoupment on realizing of the 12B investment, and is there a time limit?
No time limit, so investors can be in for a year or 10 years or more. On the sale of the asset at the end, the investors will be recouped, but they'll be paying tax at 45% as opposed to 56%.
Thanks, Jonty. Kirsty wants to know, could you give an example of someone who earns 2 million per annum? There are a few people on 5 million per annum, please.
Yeah, so simply put, if you're earning 2 million per annum, if you invest R1 million, this will reduce your taxable income by to 750,000 Rand. So when you invest $1 million, you can reduce your taxable income by 1.250 or 1.25 million Rand, thereby reducing your taxable income, and then that takes you down to 750,000 Rand. You'll then be paying tax at the 750,000 Rand tax rate.
Jonty, just on Dave wants to know, what's the minimum investment from an investment?
Ours is 250,000 Rand. But what we've said to investors, if you want to invest by early June, you need to put down a deposit of 5%. So if you want to invest R1 million, it's 50,000 Rand, and we'll then do drawdowns in July and August for the remainder of the investment. But to answer the question, it's 250,000.
And Jenny wants to know, what must she do to invest? I've put the link on the chat there. Is there anywhere else they can go?
There's a few things they can do. They can read one of our articles on BizNews and fill out. There's a form on the BizNews website. They can go onto our website, request a meeting, which is jaltech.co.za. But I assume in the communication that we'll send out to attendees, my contact information will be there, and then you can just reach out to me and I'll help.
Thanks, Jonty. Kumaran just wants to know, if I'm earning 50,000 a month, would I still gain benefit from investing the 1 million?
50,000 a month is 600,000 a year. If you had to invest and reducing your tax liability to 370, so an investment of what, 330, you'd get around, if I had to do a thumb suck, you get a tax benefit around 40%. So, what I can do for anyone is we can do the calculations for you. You can assess it yourself, but we'll be able to tell you what your tax benefit would be.
Bjorn just wants to know, the conversion from 12J to 12B, is 12B not effective from the 1st of March, and thus including any solar investments prior to March 2023?
So no, so anyone investing in 12B this year and next year will enjoy the 12B benefit at 125%. So as long as we invest or acquire solar assets before the end of February and those assets are operational, you'll get your 12B.
So I was trying to assume if there were previous investments, that obviously can't be included in the 12B. It's going to be new investments from the 1st of March, basically. Okay?
Yeah, well, we've only been receiving investments from, from March.
Yeah, perfect. David just wants to know, what is the situation for an early exit from the fund?
So, as I mentioned earlier, investors are potentially receiving all the investment back within 2 years. But over and above that, we say to investors, this is a 10-year investment. So you need to have the mindset that you're not going to have liquidity from the investment during the 10 years. What we will look at is saying to investors, if if there is an exceptional circumstance and you need to exit, we'll do a calculation on your future cash flows. We'll see what that's valued at. We'll offer that amount at a discount to you potentially, and then if you want to take it, you can, or you don't have to. But this isn't. There's no guarantee that we're going to offer this liquidity. So the best thing is to have a mindset that you're in for 10 years.
And just on that, James wants to know, what are the tax implications at the end of the 10-year period?
So the tax implications throughout the whole investment are the same. Any proceeds that you receive from this investment is taxed as income tax. So whatever your marginal tax rate is, you'll be paying tax. So every year we're looking to return around 13% to the investors based on the investment value. That 13% is taxed at 45%.
Thanks, John. I'm not sure if anyone can answer this one. Flippy wants to know, do you have any information regarding the 12 billion Rand grant fund that was launched for agriculture by the government? I'm not sure if that's in this webinar discussion at that.
Gonna shake my head too.
For sure. Ryan asks, is this the only investment this year? What incentives are there going forward? I think you mentioned the 3-year on your graphs, John, so I just can't pull them up.
So for this year and next year, the investors enjoy the 125%. Potentially the following years it'll revert to the original format, which is 100%. And even at 100%, it's the same as 12J, which we think is really attractive.
Thanks, Jonty. David wants to know, what is the protection against the government imposing import duties on product? And also there was talk of a fee for all solar users in-house.
So I guess any import tax would result in the price of solar assets going up. That'll obviously affect our end customers in terms of what solar assets they want to install. It wouldn't really affect the investment much. The second question was, just remind me.
You mentioned just the Eskom. So from a personal experience, when we were living in Parktown North, one of the close neighbours that got solar on and their bill had reduced by quite a lot. And actually they had an Eskom employee come through to them and sort of question, so that we'll put a minimum expense on your bill if you know, even though you're not using it. I'm not sure if there's that threat, Patrick, from your side as well with regards to Eskom.
It's kind of out of our hands as to, there has been talk of the connection fee, because Eskom, obviously, someone who installs solar is going to buy a whole lot less electricity. There is talk, and it's been in the press, of Eskom raising the connection fee to the grid. I think somewhere close to 900 Rand a month, when it's currently half that. And that's kind of out of our hands. Those goalposts could move.
Thanks. Cameron just wants to know, he asks for your company track record, which I think you gave up front, Patrick. Are there any guarantees?
No, I think quick. Yeah. Oh, okay. No, guarantees on the product. No, guarantees on the product. Sorry, Patrick, that makes sense. Sorry.
That's a good question for Flippy, and it's part of the reason why we're in the industry. Is I think a lot of people have been burnt in solar in terms of the quality of the product installed and the quality of the installation. And the quality of the installation is critical. So our benefit is it's backed up by a business that's been in business for over almost 20 years. We have warranties on every product we sell, and so that's one of our positive points. Whatever we bring in the area of solar, we are supplying banks with solar solutions, which they are selling on to their clients. And often banks will be financing this sort of hardware over a period of 7, 8 to 10 years. And the banks are looking for warranties for the full period of the contract with the customer, the finance contract. So on the majority of the product we sell, we have a 10-year warranty on both inverters and batteries, and panels are guaranteed well beyond that. That's all very well, but you've got to be transacting with a company that's been around for a while and has a track record. In our case, it's next year it'll be 20 years.
Well, Stu, I think we're pretty much there at the top of the hour. Thank you very much, Patrick and Jonty and Stuart, for answering those questions, or posing the questions. Next time we won't make any comments about your sartorial elegance, or inelegance rather. Thank you very much for stepping in there, Stu. Jonty, last word from your side, and then Patrick, you as well, just to sum up.
Yeah, I think this is a unique opportunity in the investor market. Not often do we see tax incentives at these levels. So I think it's exciting. The interest has been really high. We capped our fund at 100 million. We're already at 45 million, and we're looking to close early June. So I'm really confident that we'll hit our cap of 100 million. So if there is anyone interested, be in contact, because I'm really confident that we're going to be oversubscribed.
Patrick?
Alec, this is a crazy industry at the moment. The demand is huge. People are trying to solve load shedding. They are looking for long-term solutions for the cost of electricity and for surety of supply. And so it is an industry which we almost feel as though we are building the plane while we are flying it at the moment. This is a quick industry, there's huge demand in the market. So I think, as I said to Jonty, I think the 100 million cap is going to be reached quite quickly. I think there's huge demand.
Well, thanks to both Jonty and Patrick for opening our eyes to the opportunities that are available in 12B. We do know, Stu, that our community loved the 12J story, and there's no doubt that they're going to also understand. Now that they understand, they're going to take advantage of this, and that's what government wants us to do. We have a big problem in South Africa in power. If we don't get our businesses who are able to work through this by having an alternative power source, well, we won't have an economy to talk of into the future. So thank you very much for joining us. Before we leave, Stu, where will recordings of the webinar be available?
Alec, as always, we'll upload the webinar to YouTube, and then every registrant will receive a link to that recording. So we'll get it up as soon as possible.
And that's on the BizNews TV channel on YouTube, rapidly approaching 100,000 subscribers. Incredible growth that we've seen there. And information like this that you guys have shared with us today is one of the reasons why the channel is so popular. From me, Alec Hogg, and the rest of the panelists today, thanks for joining us. See you next time. Cheerio.